Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I am your host as usual, and obviously, welcome back to the show. Today's episode 85 of the show, and before we go into today's topic, we're going to do a little bit of house cleaning. First thing on the chopping block today is, obviously, today is episode 85, so that means we are currently 15 episodes away from the 100th episode. And I'm really excited for that because I've been working on this topic for a while now, and, you know, I'm still working on it, and it's going to be really fun, and you guys are going to see why it's really fun. Aside from that, going into it, another housekeeping thing. Again, thank you guys so much for helping the show to get over 800 plus total downloads. I really appreciate that. You know, I love you guys to death that you guys constantly keep coming back and listening. We're almost 200 away from 1,000, which, yeah, that's crazy. Aside from that, yeah, I think everything else has been covered because, you know, it's definitely been a much faster paced news week, clearly. If you guys have been following me on social media, I've been posting about a lot of the recent news coming out, whether it be today's topic or, you know, the new Galaxy foldable phone or the recent news with BlackBerry no longer making phones. And it's just been a crazy news week. And it's only going to get crazier because now, as the year goes quicker, you know, we have the Galaxy Unpacked event next week. We also have, you know, maybe the Apple March event, depending on what happens in China because of the whole coronavirus. But aside from that, today's topic is actually focused on Apple, which, you know, I know you guys like it when I talk about Apple because you guys really like the iPad episode. But this one is where I'm going to be a little bit more... I'm not saying that I'm going to be more an Apple shill, but I'm not going to agree with what the EU decided to go with on this one. And as a side note, I am not 100% the most knowledgeable person on this. I'm not. But I do have some opinions, and I do share some opinions with some colleagues. And, you know, I'm also going to be linking the WAN Show, which, if you guys don't know what the WAN Show is, it's, you know, it's a podcast done by Linus Tech Tips and, you know, his group. And I'm going to be leaving a link into the description of a video where they actually talked about it in more detail. And they gave their thoughts on the matter, and I, for the most part, agree with Linus on this. But let's actually talk about what happened. So, I'm also going to be putting a link in the article that I am reading today. This is from MacRumors.com, where they actually break down the whole situation. And, you know, this is what the article is titled. The article's title is EU lawmakers vote overwhelmingly in favor of common charging standard, despite Apple's protest. I don't know why they put protestations, but let's go with it. So, this was posted on January 31st of 2020 at 2:27 a.m. PST. And, you know, going into the article, they talk about, despite criticisms from Apple, EU lawmakers on Thursday voted overwhelmingly in favor for new rules to establish a common charger for all mobile device makers across Europe. Members of the European Parliament voted by 582 to 40 for a resolution urging the European Commission, which drafts EU laws, to ensure that EU consumers are no longer obligated or obliged to buy new chargers with each new device. The resolution said, voluntary agreements in the industry have significantly reduced the number of charger types, but had not resulted in one common standard. The Commission should adopt new rules by July. The lawmakers' resolution calling for, quotation, an urgent need for EU regulatory action to reduce electronic waste empower consumers to make sustainable choices, and allow them to fully participate in an efficient and well-functioning internet market. The proposed charging ports for portable devices include micro USB, USB-C, and the Lightning connector. Thursday's resolution didn't specify what mobile charging standard should be, but non-Apple mobile devices and increasingly laptops and tablets are charged by USB-C. Even Apple's own 2018 iPad Pro models, aka the iPad Pro I have, adopted USB-C wholesale, so the EU is highly unlikely to choose Apple's Lightning connector. Continuing. Apple last week pushed back against proposals for binding measures to make smartphones, tablets, and other portable devices use a standardized charging port such as USB-C. Responding to the proposals, the company issued the following statement. Apple stands for innovation and deeply cares for the customer experience. We believe regulation that forces conformity across the type of connector built into all smartphones stifles innovation rather than encouraging it, and would harm consumers in Europe and the economy as a whole. More than 1 billion Apple devices have shipped using a Lightning connector, in addition to an entire ecosystem of accessory and device manufacturers who use Lightning to serve our collective customers. Legislation would have a direct negative impact by disrupting the hundreds of millions of active devices and accessories used by our European customers and even more Apple customers worldwide, creating an unprecedented volume of electronic waste and greatly inconveniencing users. Continuing as we go into the final home stretch of all this, we do not believe there is a case for regulation given the industry is already moving to the use of USB-C through a connector or cable assembly. This includes Apple's USB-C power adapter, which is compatible with all iPhones and iPad devices. This approach is more affordable and convenient for consumers, enabling charging for a wide range of portable electronic products, encouraging people to reuse their charger, and allows for innovation. Prior to 2009, the Commission considered mandating that all smartphones only use USB micro B connectors, which would have restricted the advancement to Lightning and USB Type-C. Instead, the Commission established a voluntary, industry standards-based approach that saw the market shift from 30 chargers down to 3, soon to be 2, Lightning and USB-C, showing this approach does work. I'm going to get back into that part a little bit because that's actually, I'm surprised no one's talked about that part. Continuing. We hope the Commission will continue to seek a solution that does not restrict the industry's ability to innovate and bring exciting new technology to customers. The European Commission, which acts as an executive for the EU, has been pushing for a common charger for more than a decade. However, the latest resolution makes legislation more likely, with the EU executive having included the common charger standard as one of the set of actions it plans for this year. And then they posted an update because there was some confusion going on and they actually updated it. There has been some confusion regarding the EU's resolution for a common charger standard and whether the proposed legislation would cover just the charger brick or both the charger and the connection cable, and thus the smartphone device's port. While the EU hasn't been particularly clear on this point, their recent impact assessment study on common chargers of portable devices does suggest any regulation should cover the port as well as the connecting cable and charger. The key passage reads, in summary, the most effective approach to addressing consumer inconveniences that result from the continued existence of different, albeit mostly interoperable, charging solutions would be to pursue option 1, common connectors, in combination with option 4, interoperable external power supply. Whether the Commission accepts the recommendation of its impact assessment and enshrines it in EU law remains to be seen. I know that's a lot. There's a lot to break down, but this mainly goes down to the point is, does this mean that the iPhones will eventually have USB Type-C? And I've been telling people for a while, I am very concerned about this legislation. Because in the video that Linus does on the LAN show, he mentions that, and this is a very, very important thing to keep in mind, that the term stifle innovation has been abused to all hell and does not mean the same thing that it does. That people have just abused it and used it for ways that it is not intended to be used and used it out of context. However, Linus does believe that this is an example of stifling innovation. And he makes a good point because, and I've been saying the same thing, yes, we currently are extremely lucky that USB Type-C is great. It is. USB-C is phenomenal. It's great. I love having a lot of my devices that have USB-C that I can just use the same charger, or say for my computer, I can buy USB-C adapters that are much easier, so much easier. And obviously, in my case with my iPad, it's nice that my iPad has it too. But you also have to keep in mind that they also said they've been trying to do this a long time ago, and they did. I think you guys all remember, if you guys have been alive long enough, you guys remember that the old iPod Touches and everything used to use a 40-pin connector. That was trash. And the commission actually tried to get on Apple for that because, granted, at that time it was just micro USB and then at the same time it was the 40-pin connector. So, that what led to Apple ended up making the Lightning connector, which obviously if we're comparing micro USB to Lightning, the Lightning just stomped all over micro USB. And, they have a point because it made sense back in the day, It was different. But obviously, yes, right now we have 3 cables. And obviously I'm going to get back to that point where they mentioned probably 2 soon. That the fact that we have micro USB, USB-C, and Lightning right now is great. Great options, but I think I agree with Linus on this one, that this is an example of stifling innovation because, albeit, yes, we are lucky that USB-C is great, but what happens if someone makes something better? Does that mean that they're not allowed to do it? Because this is a very broad law. If you guys haven't realized this, it's very broad because this isn't maybe it'll just be USB-C forever. That's not what we're saying. That because if someone makes something better, why would we keep using USB-C? You get it? And this causes a whole chain reaction of different questions and different problems that nobody has really covered that much. Like obviously Linus has covered it on the WAN show, but I'm going to give my take on it because I have a very interesting way of thinking about it. When we think about USB-C, USB-C is multiple flavors. It's the same thing as, as HDMI, where there's HDMI 1.0, there's HDMI 2.0, and then there's 2.1, then 2.2. And the same thing, how with USB, there's USB 3, there's 3.1, there's 3.1 something. Like, you get what I mean? That there's multiple flavors inside of it. And even though, yes, many devices use a USB Type-C port, they're not all the same. For example, some have Thunderbolts, some don't. Like obviously the MacBooks use Thunderbolts, and more modern laptops have Thunderbolt ports on them, which are basically USB Type-C, but they're a version of it that's more efficient. We also have examples of, like the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch charges with a USB Type-C connector. However, even though, yes, it is USB-C, it doesn't operate the same way as a normal USB-C, because the way that they did it, they use a specific version of it that, and I know a lot of people have talked about this before, that it used to brick switches a lot because people would use external power banks that were not supported by Apple, by Nintendo. They wouldn't use power bricks, supported by Nintendo, and when they did, it would brick their Switch. And that's really crappy. Even though, yes, it's a USB-C port, it does, but it didn't operate the same way that a USB-C port does normally. And I think that's what makes it really hard, because Linus even pointed this out, that the fact that there's multiple flavors of USB-C, it's like 5G, that's another good example, that you can't really standardize it, because then everyone has to decide on which version to use, and that's really difficult to do. That's not as easy as you think. And even though, yes, it does look like USB-C on the bottom, it uses a USB-C cable, but it probably isn't the USB-C you're familiar with. And I think that's very concerning, that it is a situation where, yes, even though, yes, we are very lucky that USB-C is great, but at the same time, there's no set standard in it to begin with. They're all different flavors, and companies use different variations of it. So the fact that you're going to try to limit everybody to one specific version, you have to figure out which version makes sense. And at the same time, you also have to account that what happens if something better comes along? Are we not allowed to do it anymore? You get what I'm saying? And that it causes so many issues. And, you know, that's why I said I've been very hesitant to talk about this matter, because for me, I think it'd be a great idea. I've been saying for a while, I think Apple should put USB-C on an iPhone, but I've also been saying realistically, it's never going to happen, because I'm being honest with y'all. I do not believe Apple will put USB-C on an iPhone. I think, if anything, at the current rate we're going, I don't believe Apple will ever put USB-C on an iPhone. They would rather go wireless before they ever put USB-C on there. And I'm not the only one that shares that opinion. John Prosser has been saying the same thing for I don't even know how long at this point, because, you know, we have to remember AirPower was a thing and they went on stage, and if we know Apple, they'd rather go wireless than ever put USB-C on there. And that's just the truth. They would. And they'd be crazy enough they do it, because if they got rid of the headphone jack, they're definitely will never put USB-C on there, and they would go wireless instead. Aside from that, I think that it'd be interesting to see what would happen. Like, granted, yeah, I know a lot of people said, like, oh, Josh, how can you say they never would put USB-C on an iPhone? Like, they did it on the iPad. Like, yeah, that is true. You also have to keep in mind, the iPad is nowhere near the same amount of cells as the iPhone. That, you get what I'm saying? Like, it makes no sense to compare their biggest moneymaker to a very popular product and a great product in its own right, but it's not going to sell like the iPhone. And because think about it, yeah, I agree that, yeah, it would piss off a lot of people, because a lot of people have invested in Lightning connectors. They've invested in Lightning, chargers, Lightning accessories for people that like using accessories for their iPhone for, like, say, content creation or things like that. Because think about it, the Lightning connector has spawned its own form of accessories, which they've obviously mentioned. Like companies like Shure and things like that have made microphones specifically for the Lightning connector. And, there's interfaces that are based off the Lightning connector. Like, many, many factors. And yet, for some reason, people think it's a bright idea to just dump it, which you have to keep in mind. When the Lightning connector was originally invented, it was far, far better than micro USB. And making a quick transition, the fact that they're insinuating that they want to get rid of USB type or micro USB is a terrible idea. I think keeping the three connectors is the greatest thing they can do, because micro USB is very durable. Yes, it may not be the absolute best for data transferring and stuff like that, but it is also very sturdy. It's very durable. It lasts for a long time, and I'd say very basic devices don't need USB Type-C, even though, yes, USB Type-C so far, based on Linus's research and many other people's research, that, yeah, it's very durable. It's, very stable. It's a great cable overall, great connection. But micro USB is able to reduce the price on these more, I'd say, basic items, like, for example, like my Blue Yeti, it uses micro USB. It doesn't need USB Type-C. Why would it need all that data transfer? It doesn't. It's just a microphone that plugs in and, just transmits my voice. That's all it does. My Zoom recorder, it uses micro USB to become a DAC or to become a audio interface. And I think a lot of people don't seem to realize that these more basic devices don't really need USB-C. it's just a nice thing to have. Even though, yes, I think on higher end laptops, they should have USB A's, they should have USB C's, and there shouldn't be a micro USB anywhere on there. But I think, to me, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, granted, I've already said this, and I'll say it again. Apple would rather go wireless than ever put USB-C on an iPhone. Some people say, oh, they're just going to put an adapter in the box. Nah, chief. They won't put an adapter in that box. Like, they already gave you the fast charger. If they're crazy enough, bro, if they can get it working, they're going to go all wireless. They will. They'll make a portless iPhone, and because that's the only other progression. It only makes sense. Apple's been wanting to do this for a while, because think about it. When you have an iPhone or you're in the Apple ecosystem, you're not transferring data through a cable. You're airdropping it. And airdrop is very reliable. It's a great thing. It's just it's amazing. And it makes transferring files between devices so much easier. Like, the fact that you can just do it because they're linked, and it actually transfers really quickly as well, to be honest. It only makes sense. They will do it. They'll continue to improve wireless charging, because wireless charging is at a rate where it's really good, very reliable. And it's also better for your battery health, because if you guys aren't aware, or I think many of y'all that are aware, Apple doesn't have a good track record with their batteries in general, because the batteries tend to degrade very easily because of connections, which is weird, even though those chargers are boo-boo. And other companies seem to have better battery degradation, because they're able to maintain higher rates of charge and just not degrade to the degree that Apple's do. But some people have reported that when you only use an iPhone with wireless charging, or use any phone with wireless charging and just wireless charging, it actually lasts longer. The battery life actually is increased because the battery's health is being preserved. And to be honest, if Apple decides to go full wireless, they're going to make their own proprietary wireless charger. And if they do, because that's the rumor that we have so far, is that the rumors is that Apple is working on a more basic, down-to-earth version of AirPower, and not as crazy, over the top that they're ambitious as they wanted to be originally. And now, granted, I am under the impression that unless if we see this thing actually in hand and see this thing working and actually sells, we're not going to believe Apple's going to make a wireless charger, because AirPower, they came on stage in 2018, said they were going to do it, and then they changed their mind like a year later and be like, yeah, about that, we're not doing it, we canceled it, we couldn't figure it out. And yeah, that kind of sucks. That's pretty boo-boo. But I don't know, guys. I think with me, I'm not opposed to the idea of having a standard. It's the problem is that it's hard to make something a standard when you don't even know what's the standard in that actual standard, And I highly doubt they're going to make, and the articles even mentioned it too, I highly doubt they're going to make the lightning connector standard, Highly doubt. It's realistically going to be USB Type-C. But I do not see Apple putting USB-C on an iPhone. I don't think it's going to happen. It ain't going to happen anytime soon. If anything, they're going to make this tiny little adapter for it, and that's how you're going to charge it, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And I think in my mind, like, yes, I do agree, and Linus has said the same thing too, that yes, there's many great regulations in place to help the market and help protect customers in the tech space and everything like that. But at the same time, these lawmakers sometimes don't even know what they're talking about when it comes to tech. Because they don't understand it, because most people don't even understand how USB-C works. Heck, I don't even understand how it works that well. Linus actually joked about it on the WAN show. Like, nobody really knows what USB-C is or how it really functions, And that's a little bit concerning, especially because if you want to make something a standard, wouldn't it make sense that you should understand how this thing works back and forth like the back of your hand? And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, to be honest, guys, like, I'm a little bit lost for words a little bit, due to the fact that I just can't believe the EU, is trying to push this again, and the fact that they actually got a large majority to vote in favor of it. But I do not believe this is good for the market. I do not believe this is a good idea in general, because the fact that now you're going to be limiting competition and what competition is actually doing, that's what I said is I agree with Apple with the whole stifling innovation, and, it's not going to be good for the economy and, actual competitive, because the best economy is obviously a very competitive economy. A good marketplace is when you have a lot of competition. It's the same thing I say about the whole smartphone market, that when you have competition, you get great products if you're the consumer. The consumer always wins in a very competitive market. In our case, in the US, the market is not so competitive. Yes, we have many options, but a majority of the market is owned by either Samsung or Apple. And obviously, depending on who you're following and who's sharing the information, they'll sway towards their party, saying that they have the majority or this has the majority. You get what I'm saying? And then you get such a big drop off from number 2 to number 3 that it's not even funny. That it's very obvious that it's very top heavy, that there's 2 brands that rule them all. And this really leads into the whole, I'd say, just a side topic that, it leads into unhealthy competition, because people don't understand what they're dealing with in the market, that they say, hey, if it's not as good as this, then it's trash. But if you ask some people, to be honest, a lot of people really love the Lightning connector, because the Lightning connector is great. Now, granted, yes, for transferring data and everything on hard drives and stuff like that, yes, USB-C is more popular, but there's also Lightning adapt. There's also Lightning-based SSDs, hard drives, etc. There's stuff like that it's made for. But that's also because they've been around for a while. The Lightning connector has been around for a while, and it's still great. Now, granted, yes, the cable itself that has the Lightning connector is not so great, because that cable seems to rip very easily, and that cheap silicone garbage they put on it, which is kind of a nice thing, that the USB-C cables are much more sturdier. That's not going to happen to you. But you get what I'm saying. Aside from that, I think this is a bad call from the EU. I do not believe that they should have voted in favor of this. I think this is a bad idea, and we're going to find out really quickly why it was a bad idea. And, that's my thoughts overall, is that this is a prime example of stifling innovation. This is a prime example, because where do you draw the limit? What is too far, or what isn't considered too far is the better question. Because at this point, they can limit anything. If they choose that the standard is USB-C, anything that uses micro USB gets thrown out, and it has to be USB-C now. And it's not a good idea, because, like I said, USB-C is also expensive as well. And yes, I get it. It also will help the market in terms of, hey, if they have USB-C, that means you can buy from anybody that sells USB-C. But you have to be careful, because there's different flavors of USB-C. And we learned this from the Nintendo Switch. We learned this from the fact that there's Thunderbolt 3. We learned this from the fact that not everything is the exact same, that there's so many different variations, and people still do not understand what USB-C is exactly. And I think it's going to be interesting once we really, get the meat of it, and break it down more and see how this plays out. Because like I said, we have plenty of time. There is not going to be any legislation in place until, like they said, July-ish is when they said that's when we'll theoretically see some legislation go down. But I'm just being honest with you guys. I do not think this is a smart idea. I think this is a bad call from the EU. I think they just did this just for political reasons, just because for the environment, this is where I say that politicians should stay out of technology and stop doing things just for political pandering, and stop, saying that, oh, we're doing this for the greater good. No, this is to push a political message, and that's what you're doing. And, we're going to find out. Yes, I've mentioned this before, and I know Linus says the same thing. We're very lucky that USB-C is great. We're very, very lucky that it's so good, and that it's just very reliable, it's very efficient, it's very quick. But what happens when somebody wants to make something better and they're not allowed to because it's considered against the norm? And this is what makes people, this is why I say this is what leads to iterative updates instead of actual full-fledged updates and new ideas, new concepts, people wanting to, experiment, go outside the box, do something new, because they're being limited to not make these calls, and it's going to be interesting. Like, granted, if, I'll keep saying this, if the iPhone ever goes wireless, a lot of people are going to give Apple flack, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, this is the future. Apple is ahead of the game again. Nobody can catch up to them. And I'm like, there's going to be people on both sides saying anything. But in my opinion, I don't think this is a bright idea. This ain't it for me, Chief. I'm extremely worried about how the EU decides to go about this. Like, I'm very concerned that they decide to get rid of micro USB, which I think that'd be a terrible idea, because micro USB is a great way for smaller devices that don't need crazy transfer speeds and everything, and they just work. Like, just to work, But aside from that, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for coming back and listening to the show. I really, really appreciate it, and I love you guys so much. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I hope to see you guys back next week. But until then, thank you guys for your time. Love you guys to death. Please have a wonderful weekend. Please be safe. Bye, guys.
Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.